Well, today we are in Exodus chapter 15. We're going to go through chapter 16, and I'm going to recap where we were last time. Moses and the children of Israel had just crossed through the Red Sea, and God had closed up the Red Sea on the Egyptians. And now they're singing the Song of Moses, a victory song. We went to Revelation chapter 15 and we read how in heaven they're going to sing this Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb, which is going to be a similar kind of song talking about passing out of, this earth into heaven. I want to give you one more application for that though. It's the same thing, just as Moses delivered the children of Israel and led them through the Red Sea out of Egypt. Jesus, who is a prophet like Moses, who is the Messiah, come like Moses, is doing the same thing for us. He delivers us out of slavery, out of the world, through the Red Sea, and into victory, as they sung this victory song here. And Jesus is the one and the person that leads us. And so this is just another reference of how Jesus follows Moses and how Jesus is a prophet like Moses, which is just another reference of how we know that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah. One of the neat things that we said last time is that in this song is that they talk about those who are delivered are the ones that God purchased through the blood of the Lamb. We also talk here and we learn that at the end of this, God is going to reign forever and ever. So that's what we have to look forward to. And that's how it ends. But one thing also I didn't bring up last time was Miriam. We talked about how she brought the timbrel and they danced. So when we get to heaven, one of the first things we're going to do is a victory dance. But I think it's really interesting to notice that that God highlighted Miriam. She is, one of the first women in the book of Exodus to be highlighted. She helped her brother Moses when he was born in the Nile, and now here she is being mentioned again, clearly helping lead Israel as one of Israel's leaders. Miriam plays an integral part. And I just want to say that, especially since she's a woman, and just point out that God is using people like Miriam in the Old Testament. They call her a prophetess at one point, and God is using her in leadership for Israel. All right, let's continue on though, where we were in Exodus chapter 15, verse 22. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. So now they left the Red Sea. It's been 3 days, and they can't find water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. Then he made for them a statute and regulation, and there notice he is capitalized if you're reading along here. It means God. We're talking about God when we're talking about he here. He tested them, and he said, "If you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians. For I, the Lord, am your healer." A couple things to notice about these verses here. It was only 3 days since Israel sang this amazing victory song after they've crossed over the Red Sea. And now 3 days later, they've been going, they haven't found water. And they were literally saying, "Lord, you will bring us and plant us in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your dwelling. They're literally singing God's praises, and 3 days later now, they don't have water, and now they're grumbling against the Lord. It says they grumbled at Moses, but they grumble again later, and Moses said, you're not grumbling against me, you're grumbling against God. And it's interesting that somehow, after such a great victory, only 3 days later, we can experience the troubles of life, the bitterness of life, which is what Marah represents. Marah was a place that said the waters were bitter. So when we experience bitterness in life, it's easy for us to grumble against God. It's easy for us to forget the victory that He even just brought us through. And it can be easy as humans for us to turn and complain. And I think this is important. It says here that God tested them. God wanted to see if they would rely upon Him. So sometimes after victories and sometimes after in periods of our life, God tests His people. He doesn't just allow us to go throughout life. He wants to see the measure of who we are. He wants to see if we truly trust Him. He wants to know if our relationship with Him is real, not just in good times, but even in the bad times. Do we still trust Him when things go bad? And can we rely on Him? It's interesting, this actual situation in Marah is also a prophetic reference to Jesus. If you notice, one of the things that it said is that Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and He threw it in the waters, and the waters became sweet. I want to submit to you that prophetically, this tree represents the cross. The Bible talks about he that hangs upon a tree is cursed. And it was through this tree, Jesus' death on the tree, on the cross, it's the answer. This Jesus' death on this, it's the answer to the bitterness of life. Jesus said, come to me and I will give you water and you will never thirst again. And literally, Jesus' death, receiving Jesus' death, and Him as our Messiah is the answer to turning the bitter waters of life sweet. And that's why I took a tree and threw it in the waters and it became sweet. It was another prophetic example pointing to Jesus, that His death on the cross was the answer to the bitter waters of Marah, the bitter waters of life. So God has an answer to the bitterness and the hard times of life. And if we will look to Jesus, if we will look to God during these times, instead of grumbling, He has abundant, sweet life planned for us if we will trust Him and trust in His plan of salvation, even though He might test us and allow us to go through bitterness for a time. But even though the night might be here, and even though we might cry at times, joy does come in the morning. All right, let's keep going on. Let's go back, and I want to read the second part of verse 25. There He made for them a statute and regulation, and there He tested them. And He said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in His sight, and give ear to His commandments, and keep all His statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Notice here, God says, give earnest heed to my voice. So when God speaks, we need to listen to what He says. And do what is right in His sight. Sometimes we just know what is right. We need to do what is right. The Bible says if a man knows to do good and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. God expects us to do what is right. And finally, to give ear to his commandments and keep his statutes. So the laws that God has established, his instructions that he's established, the things that are natural that he has established for us, if we follow these things, the Bible says that he will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Now this promise was made to Israel, of course. But I think it's really interesting. This is one of the times in the Bible where we read, I, Yahweh, the Lord, am your healer. This is where we've always gotten God, our healer. It's one of the names of God. And I think it's interesting here, even though this promise was made to Israel, it shows you a characteristic about God. That when we follow God's principles, when we do what's right in His sight, when we listen to Him, when we keep His commandments and statutes, God says, I want to protect your bodies. I want to keep you healthy. I am your healer. He wants us to be whole. It shows us that God's desire for us is for us to be healed, for us to be whole, not for us to be sick. We see this in Jesus. What did He come and do? He healed all those who were sick. He was just following in who God is, in the sense that God is a healer. So we can ask God to heal us, and we can know that God wants to heal us. Verse 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters. Notice they were just at this place where they couldn't drink the water. God wanted to test them, but right after this place, God had a place of abundance set up for Israel. 12 springs of water, 70 date palms, more than all the water they could ever want, and food, etc. God was faithfully leading them through the wilderness. And even though we might go through some hard times, know that God has extremely good times. He's a good shepherd leading us to good places, and we can count on Him to get us through bitter seasons as we trust in Jesus to take us to an abundance place where there's lots of water, lots of palms, plenty of satisfaction naturally and satisfaction for our spirit. All right, we're going into Exodus chapter 16 now. Verse 1, then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. So this is 30 days, because they left the 15th day of the first month when they had Passover, and now it's the 15th day of the second month after the departure from the land of Egypt. So it's been 30 days, basically, since they left Egypt, and now they are in the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Sinai. And the whole congregations of the sons of Israel grumbled, there's that word grumbled again, against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. It's interesting, they're grumbling. They've got a little bit of confidence in God because they said it would be better we died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. Yet they're still longing to be back in Egypt where life was easier. Again, here it is. God is testing them. God wants to see, do they truly trust Him? Do they truly believe and rely upon Him? So the Lord replies in verse 4, and He says to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, "At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us?" You remember I told you, even though they were grumbling against Moses, really they were grumbling against the Lord. This is a good lesson, to be careful to grumble against the people that God has put in our lives to lead us. It's, sometimes we may think they're not leading us correctly or that God is not responding, but if we know that God actually did put people in our lives to lead us, then we need to have confidence and faith in their leadership. It doesn't mean that we technically always follow people blindly and that we don't serve the Lord, and that at the end of the day, the Lord is our master. He's who we follow, who we listen to, and who we obey. But it is important to trust the Lord's leadership through leaders that he's placed in our lives. That being said, God basically creates an extreme contrast here between their grumblings and his salvation. He basically says, where we hear here, Moses says, you're going to see God's glory fulfilled. And that is the way that God responds to the situation of where they didn't have food in the wilderness. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick back up when we come back next time in verse 8. We're going to pick back up. But God is saying, I'm going to respond, and you're going to have confidence in me. He was testing them here, and he's going to continue to test them throughout this situation. I look forward to being with you next time. All right. Goodbye.